Power does not always fail where it is weakest. More often, it begins to fail where it is strongest, where its methods appear most reliable. Control over movement can resemble control over outcome. But the two are not the same. The ability to dominate the sea, to decide where trade flows and where armies may travel, creates the impression of reach without necessarily producing compliance. In the case of the British Empire, authority achieved a form of mastery that seemed absolute. Its fleets could appear anywhere, enforce blockades, protect commerce, and project force across oceans. Yet on land, that same authority encountered resistance that did not yield to naval dominance. The tension is not between success and failure, but between two different forms of control, one immediate, the other conditional. The question is not why the empire ruled the seas, but why that rule could not extend itself into lasting command over land. By the late 18th and early 19th centuries, British authority had consolidated around maritime institutions. The Royal Navy stood as the central instrument of imperial enforcement. Naval bases stretched from Gibraltar to India, forming a chain of supply and communication. Trade routes connected colonies and markets, reinforced by convoys and protected shipping lanes. Parliament and commercial elites aligned around policies that prioritized naval investment, maintaining fleets capable of sustained global presence. Key conflicts reinforced this structure. During the Napoleonic Wars, British fleets imposed blockades on continental ports, restricting enemy trade while ensuring their own access to global resources. Victory at sea secured isolation of adversaries and protected British commerce. Overseas territories expanded incrementally, often secured through maritime access rather than direct territorial conquest. Authority appeared stable because its central mechanism, the fleet, could operate independently of local conditions on land. Yet this independence created a boundary. Naval dominance allowed Britain to choose where to engage, but not how populations on land would respond once engagement began. Ports could be controlled, but interiors remained beyond immediate reach. Supply could be delivered, but authority could not be imposed without sustained presence. Colonial administrators issued directives expecting compliance shaped by distant enforcement, while local populations adjusted their behavior based on immediate realities rather than distant threats. The American colonies revealed this distinction early. British authority controlled the Atlantic, moved troops across it, and maintained naval superiority. Yet inland, the structure of control required more than access. It required continuous enforcement across dispersed settlements. Resistance did not present itself as a single target. It formed locally, adapting to terrain and distance. The sea delivered power. The land absorbed it. Even when cities were occupied, surrounding regions remained contested. Authority could hold positions without controlling conditions. The cost of extending control inland rose with each mile from the coast, while the effectiveness of naval superiority diminished. Merchants along colonial ports adjusted loyalties according to immediate authority, while inland communities operated under shifting expectations of enforcement that rarely arrived in consistent form. The pattern repeated elsewhere. In India, British authority entered through coastal footholds, trading posts secured by naval protection. Over time, these expanded into administrative centers, but each extension inland required alliances, negotiations, and localized governance structures that could not be managed from the sea. Authority depended on intermediaries, on regional rulers whose cooperation was conditional. Naval control ensured supply and reinforcement. It did not guarantee obedience. The more authority extended inland, the more it relied on arrangements it did not fully control. These arrangements introduced delays. Decisions made in London required translation into local action through multiple layers of authority. each with its own interests. Officials implemented policies assuming alignment, while local actors interpreted directives through the lens of immediate consequence rather than imperial intent. The distance between decision and enforcement widened. Then there was the question of scale. The empire's maritime network functioned through concentration. Ships could be directed, fleets assembled, routes secured. On land, scale worked differently. Territory expanded not as lines, but as surfaces, irregular, populated, resistant to uniform control. Each additional region required administrative structures, legal systems, and military presence. Naval supremacy simplified movement. Land governance multiplied complexity. In regions such as Southern Africa, conflicts emerged not from direct confrontation between equal forces, but from prolonged engagements with populations embedded in terrain. Campaigns required time, adaptation, and continuous presence. Victory could be declared in engagements, yet control remained partial. Settlers, soldiers, and local populations navigated overlapping authorities, adjusting behavior as conditions shifted, often without clear indication of which power would prevail in the longer term. Authority began to encounter its own limits, not through defeat, but through extension. The costs of maintaining inland control accumulated quietly. Communication delays slowed response. Local resistance adapted faster than centralized authority could adjust. Policies designed for uniform application encountered fragmented realities. Meanwhile, naval dominance continued largely unchanged. The fleet remained effective, protecting trade and projecting power globally. This success reinforced confidence in the existing structure. But the two domains, sea and land, did not operate on the same terms. Naval victories produced immediate, visible results. Land control required sustained, invisible maintenance. This difference altered perception. Authority measured its strength through the lens it understood best. As long as the Navy remained dominant, the empire appeared secure. Challenges on land were interpreted as temporary disruptions rather than structural limitations. Administrative reports described progress, while the underlying conditions of control remained unstable and dependent on continuous intervention. Then came the accumulation of commitments. Each territory required resources. Each conflict required attention. The empire's reach extended across continents, linking distant regions through maritime routes. Yet the capacity to manage these regions inland did not scale at the same rate. Authority began to rely on its ability to move quickly between crises rather than resolve them fully. Inhabitants of contested regions experienced governance as intermittent, with authority appearing decisively in moments of conflict and receding during periods of apparent stability. The illusion of control persisted because the mechanisms of projection remained intact. Even into the late 19th and early 20th centuries, British naval supremacy faced few direct challenges. Trade flowed. Routes remained open. The structure that had enabled expansion continued to function, but on land, pressures accumulated. National movements emerged, administrative costs increased, and the legitimacy of external rule faced sustained questioning. Authority could deploy force, but each deployment revealed the limits of what force could achieve. The response often followed established patterns: reinforcement, negotiation, partial concession. These actions addressed immediate pressures without altering the underlying structure. Authority still believed in its capacity to manage. The fracture did not arrive as a single event. It emerged as a narrowing of options. Naval control could still secure access, but it could not compel inland stability without escalating commitments. Each attempt to maintain authority required deeper involvement, which in turn increased exposure to resistance. The empire faced a choice that was not immediately recognized as such: continue extending inland control at increasing cost, or accept limits to authority beyond the coastline. Neither option aligned with existing expectations. In administrative centers, decisions continued to be made under the assumption that control, once established, could be maintained indefinitely with sufficient adjustment. Yet the adjustments required became more frequent, more complex, and less decisive. What remained constant was the sea. Ships still moved. Routes remained open. The visible structure of power persisted. But beneath that continuity, the relationship between authority and territory had shifted. Control of movement did not translate into control of outcome. And so the empire continued, projecting strength across oceans while negotiating its position on land. Authority adapted, but always within the constraints it had created. Each decision reinforced the distinction between where it could act immediately and where it could only influence over time. In that distinction, the limits became visible, not as a collapse, but as a condition. Power remained present, active, and capable. But its domain of certainty narrowed. The sea continued to respond predictably. The land did not. And within that imbalance, authority moved forward, carrying a form of strength that could not fully resolve the space it had already entered. Join us on Timeless Questions, where ancient stories, enduring ideas, and human nature meet in quiet reflection.